You work on a lot of catastrophic crises
Yeah.
on behalf of clients. You parachute in a lot at times where an organization's going through something very challenging to bring objectivity and bring guidance and counsel.
You know, it's funny because when people say to me, what do you do? I mostly lead with that. I say, I help manage organizational crisis. And I do think people think it's really interesting, and it is. The hours suck.
They usually start on Friday afternoon.
Have you ever noticed? I mean, if people say, when will you know a crisis is coming? And I'll say Friday afternoon or Sunday morning, because that's when they tend to. I think it's funny that we get the calls. I think leaders of organizations, usually they know what's going on, obviously. But I think they kind of reach Friday afternoons and they begin their freak out. Or they go home on Friday and they're not sleeping well Friday or Saturday, and then on Sunday morning we're getting the phone calls. But it tends to be, those are the trigger days.
Right.
'Tis true. You also are a leader of what has really become a management consulting practice here. We're going through so much change right now, and clients are going through so much change. It really can be a catalyst moment. So how do you see that practice and what we do here?
You take a look at companies that have a challenge, and when they look at it and the biggest part of the challenge is technology, well, they're going to call someone like Accenture or Deloitte. You look at another organization where they may have a strategy issue or a lot of it's tied to finance, they're going to call McKinsey. People call us for what really is management consulting when they have to make a big change and they can't really force everybody to do it. They have to communicate to them the need for the change, the reason, and the way to get there and to get them on board. That is a function of strategic communication. And that's why we've managed to get hired for management consulting by groups like the United States Golf Association. You know, they were going through a big change. They couldn't force anybody to do anything, but they needed to communicate to large groups of people the need for dramatic change. So I always say we do management consulting work in areas where communication is the principal tool that is going to make this thing happen. And I think as we get further and further down the road, it tends to apply more and more because communication is so important. The world is no longer going to let you sit there and hide the ball and not ask what's going on, how are you getting there, how did you pay for it, and who's producing it. So you're going to have to communicate, and more often than not now we're being brought into these pieces, which I think you would have thought 15 and 20 years ago, no, you would have called the comms people after you figured it all out and said, here, write a news release.
Right.
Well, that doesn't work anymore.
Well, especially because I think there are smart communicators in every organization, but if you're inside, you don't have that objectivity to be able to see outside of it. And bringing that in to help you anticipate those risks, manage them, and thought plan through how are you going to bring people along on this journey, because you need people to come along with you.
Right.
To be successful.
Well, I mean, look at crisis situations and how things have changed. I mean, literally in the old days, that'd be 2 years ago, firms would, they'd call the lawyers. What do we do? And I remember, again, back to Kathy, but I remember the first time Kathy articulating, she said, well, the lawyers, they have an opinion and they have some direction, but that's based on legal structure. Well, you also have to worry about, are you a public company? Because there's another whole set of rules for that. Are you going to have to deal with the media? Because journalism, you know this, you grew up in the business. Journalism has its own rules on how they operate. And then you've got all of the other concerns. You've got an entire operation of team members behind you. Who's communicating and what are you communicating? And then you ultimately have your customers, and sometimes that may be consumers. And in the old days, you look at the Volkswagen crisis, the lawyers would have said, hell no, don't admit anything. Let's see what we can figure out and find a way out of this thing. The CEO at Volkswagen was smart enough to say, well, you know what? That's brilliant. We could win the legal fight and we'll be a damaged brand. He said, no, we're going to admit the wrongdoing to the horror of the attorneys. We're going to come clean. And 2 years later, they were number one brand in the world. And he understood that the reputation being preserved was more important than winning a court case or dealing with the regulators. And
That's a good example.
that just kind of shows you why, if you think you just need the legal advice, that's just one component. You need to understand how journalists work and their rules. You need to understand what's going on. Do you report to the SEC? I mean, all of those things have to
All
come
your
in.
stakeholder groups.
Right.
Then you have to take a look at, here are the options. And maybe fighting it is the right thing to do legally. But you better get advice for all those other quadrants, or else you're just looking at one thing.
Right, which makes me think of something I hear you and Kathy talk about a lot. So there's a crisis and there's a bad day. And a lot of the times, like, clients don't know the difference between the two. So talk to us about that.
Well, everyone, when things are going poorly, everyone thinks it's a crisis. The people who are smart enough to call early enough avert crisis, right? They're like, okay, we're heading down a path here. This is not good. And we get quite a few clients who call us very early on, and we're able to kind of look at it. A crisis, literally, you have to be able to look at it and say, this is an existential moment for the organization. We could really harm our reputation. We could lose business. We could lose customers, clients, employees could leave. That really kind of formulates what would be a crisis. We had one, Bess, I think you worked on this with me, but
Yeah,
you probably can't tell anyone or you'd have to kill them.
probably.
We had another one where it was a hospital system, and through an oversight, some things they were using to screen patients just never got upgraded. Even the inspectors who came to the hospital over a 2-year period didn't even catch it. And when they caught it, they were horrified. And it wasn't like it was bad stuff or they were missing things. They just didn't
Right.
have the newest one in. But to them, it was a crisis. And we were
Yeah.
like, no, you're having a bad day. And so let's get the new stuff in. Don't screen anybody else in the meantime. But then we had another client where they had 2 years of erroneous radiation treatments for cancer patients over a 2-year period. People died.
Under and over treatment.
Under and over radiated. People were injured. That was the worst crisis I've ever worked on.
Yeah.
Liz, you know this. We had to write a letter that needed to go out to everyone, whether it was survivors or cancer patients, to tell them what had happened. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I kept saying when we were putting it together, I was like, somebody's going to come home. It's going to be after 5 o'clock. They're going to be about to sit down to dinner, and they're going to open up this letter and go, my cancer was improperly treated, and that injury I have is from it. Or my wife who died 2 years ago. And I said, what are you doing? And so I'm writing that letter thinking, these are people who are going to get letters and they won't be able to sleep. And that's when we said, someone's got to answer the phone 24 hours a day.
Right.
Someone's got to take responsibility for it. You've got to be able to talk to them in person, face to face. I'm really proud of the work we did on that one.
Yeah.
They didn't get sued by one patient or one family because they handled it so well.
So important.
Yeah.